Welcome to the Best Interest Podcast, where we believe Benjamin Franklin's advice that an investment in knowledge pays the best interest, both in finances and in your life. Every episode teaches you personal finance and investing in simple terms. Now, here's your host, Jesse Kramer.
Hello and welcome to episode 97 of the Best Interest Podcast. My name is Jesse Kramer. Later in today's episode, Dr. Brad Klontz is going to be joining us. You might have heard of Brad. He's a pretty big celebrity in the personal finance, financial planning world because he is both a doctor of psychology and a CFP, a real expert, a kind of cross-domain expert when it comes to financial psychology, the way that human brains think about money, and what that means for financial planning, what that means for applied behavioral finance. And he's also very intentionally entertaining, a little provocative at times, and he's certainly going to get you thinking today. And we're going to talk about some interesting financial planning and behavioral finance things. But first, as always, we'll do a quick review of the week. This one comes from Matthew P.E., who gave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. And Matthew said, "Wonderful. I just found this great podcast. I'm a lover of most investing in personal finance content. I've listened to a lot of it, and I have my own podcast. I can spot a good one when I find it. This is one of those podcasts." Well, Matthew, thank you very much for those kind words. As always, you can write into me, Matthew, jesse@bestinterest.blog. Shoot me an email, and we'll get you hooked up with one of these super soft Best Interest t-shirts. And while you're at it, Matthew, go ahead and shoot me a link of your podcast. I'm interested to tune in and see what you're all about. So, listeners, today, before we get to Brad Klontz, Dr. Brad Klontz, I want to read a couple articles from the Best Interest blog that have to do with this very common, important intersection between our brains and our finances. The first article, the first topic is called Great Investors' Little Secret. Because outsiders all over the world, if you're an outsider, you might think you know how something works. You know the type, the armchair experts, they're giving their opinions at the Thanksgiving table. But what studies have found is that quite often the least experienced are the most confident in their knowledge, right? This is the Dunning-Kruger effect, if you're not familiar with it, which often shows that confidence builds very, very rapidly when expertise increases only a little bit. And then eventually, most of us, we start to learn so much that we realize, oh, I know a lot less than I thought I did. Your confidence starts to come back to earth as it probably should. And then only later, as you truly become an expert, does your confidence start to increase again on a particular subject. A lot of us, in all manner of subjects, are stuck at the point where we know a tiny little bit, and yet somehow we're very confident that we must know a lot about that subject. Anyway, the whole idea for this point today, what I'm trying to make, is that insiders, when you're an insider in something, then you actually know how something works. And that, as the Muse says, that makes all the difference. So take basketball, for example. Outsiders think that college basketball talent is a very good indicator of NBA success. Whereas insiders, they know that that's kind of wrong. You know, the NBA is about size and strength and speed. And if you can't shoot in the NBA, to some extent, at least when you're young enough, that's not that big of a problem. They'll teach you how to shoot, but they can't teach someone how to be 7 feet tall. They can't really teach someone how to have a 44-inch vertical leap. There's a reason that the 5', 11-inch tall shooting guard from Pepperdine, who set college records for three-point shooting, basically goes undrafted into the NBA. It's not because he wasn't good enough to break college records. I mean, he was obviously very good at that. But at 5'11", he's probably too short, too weak, or too slow to really make it in the NBA. Now, insiders know that's true. And you just have to look at the NBA, look at the rosters to realize, oh, not everybody who is a Division I basketball star translates over into the NBA. For example, Giannis Antetokounmpo, apologies, Giannis, if I got your name wrong. I think I kind of got it right. He's arguably a top 3, a top 5, a top 10 player in the NBA right now. He's put on 50 pounds of muscle since entering the NBA. It's not to help out his jump shot. It's so that he can outmuscle the strong competition. They couldn't teach him to be whatever he is, 6'11" with gangly long arms, and he can jump out of the gym. He had that naturally. He had to learn how to shoot. He had to put on some muscle, and now he's one of the best players on planet Earth. We can apply the same insider-outsider thought to golf. Non-golfers assume that golf is just about smashing the ball 300 yards. I would say weekend amateurs who they know enough to be dangerous, they've heard this phrase before that you drive for show, but you putt for dough, meaning that driving is just showy and doesn't really matter. Hitting the ball long doesn't really matter. It's putting around the green that truly matters, and they're kind of right. But insiders know that the best golfers in the world, they really just do it all. At this point in the game's history, the best golfers in the world are the ones who, yes, they drive it consistently 320 or 330 or 340 yards, and then they hit their 7-iron to 18 feet, and then they sink the hard birdie putts. They really can do it all. And of course, poor assumptions, poor outsider assumptions, they also plague the investing world. One of the biggest misconceptions is that outsiders think that investing is about intelligence and or secret knowledge, right? Warren Buffett is just smarter than everyone else. Those guys working on Wall Street, they just know more than anyone else. Oh, you don't know math? Well, you're screwed. There's no way you can be a good investor if you don't know math. But insiders know that investing is much more about temperament. We're going to use that word a lot today, temperament. And for what it's worth, this misunderstanding, this outsider-insider understanding of intelligence versus temperament, it's very understandable. After all, the most popular investing book of all time is The Intelligent Investor. It's not the well-tempered investor, it's the intelligent investor. But one of the great ironies of that book, of the book The Intelligent Investor, is that its most famous chapters and quotes are all about temperament. For example, Benjamin Graham writes in The Intelligent Investor, quote, "Investing isn't about beating others at their game, it's about controlling yourself at your game," end quote. The list goes on. The biggest investors of all time, whether it's Ben Graham or Warren Buffett or Howard Marks or anyone else, they all talk about temperament being more important than intelligence. Here's a quote from Warren Buffett. "Investing is not a game where the guy with the 160 IQ beats the guy with the 130 IQ. Once you have ordinary intelligence, what you need is the temperament to control the urges that get other people into trouble in investing." Here's a quote from Howard Marks. "I also think people who are inherently unemotional will have it much easier. A lack of an emotionality is a gift, in investing that is, but perhaps not in other areas like marriage. It's not my point that emotional people can't be good investors, but it will require a great deal of self-awareness and self-restraint," end quote from Howard Marks. And now here's one more quote from Annie Duke, famous poker player, but a lot of poker paradigms, they translate over into investing. Annie Duke knows it and she writes about it in her books. Annie writes and says, "Even research communities of highly intelligent and well-meaning individuals can fall prey to confirmation bias, as IQ is positively correlated with the number of reasons people find to support their own side in an argument," end quote. Now, when I originally wrote this article, I think it was probably sometime in 2023. And if you don't recall, 2022 was a pretty bad year, a uniquely bad year in investing markets. Both stocks and bonds really performed poorly in 2022. And the fact of the matter is that to be a good investor, you didn't have to predict that 2022 was going to be a bad year. You can get away with just not knowing that up front. That's okay. Because instead, good investing has to be the ability to be emotionally stable and to zoom out away from that specific year, 2022, and to see the bigger picture. Good investing is the discipline to build a responsible portfolio and avoid any traps that force you to sell to survive. You know, your portfolio is so risky that when markets drop, your portfolio tanks and you feel panicked and you feel like the only way to get away from that panic is to sell. That's selling to survive. It's selling to appease that part of your lizard brain that kicks in the flight or fight when your portfolio goes down. You want to avoid that. And the way you avoid that is by setting up a properly structured and risk mitigated portfolio up front. Sure, intelligence definitely doesn't hurt your investing outcomes, at least in most cases. Annie Duke might push against that quote a little bit. But paradoxically, the most important knowledge an investor can possess is meta-knowledge. It's knowing that knowledge has diminishing returns. Or as Buffett put it, that investing is not a game where the guy with the 160 IQ beats the guy with the 130 IQ. Panic selling is not a decision of intelligence. It's a decision of temperament. Same with chasing the hot stock or the hot fund or dumping your college loan money into Tesla stock. Those are not decisions of intelligence. Those are decisions of temperament. Investing is about decision making. That's a good thing, right? We're all experienced decision makers in our lives. We all know certain decisions are based on synthesizing evidence. Okay, that might be intelligence. But many decisions are based on gut feel or behavioral biases or simple hormonal drives. Was that donut the intelligent thing to eat, or was that a temperamental decision? Intelligence versus temperament is the difference between knowing the nutrition facts of every food versus implementing good eating habits. As Annie Duke also said, thinking in bets starts with recognizing that there are exactly two things that determine how our lives turn out. Thing number one is the quality of our decisions, and thing number two is luck. What determines Annie Duke's quality of our decisions? Well, It's mostly temperament with a sprinkling of intelligence. Insiders know it's true, and now you do too. And now one more article before Brad joins us today where I talk about 7 different ways that our brain can sabotage our money. And I want to start with a quote. It's a simple phrase. It's the most significant outcome from the psychologist Barry Schwartz's research, as described in the very well-known book, The Paradox of Choice. And the quote is, "Less is more. Too much is stressful." Now, Barry Schwartz said that, and he continued on, and he wrote, "While increased choice allows us to achieve objectively better results, it also leads to greater anxiety, indecision, paralysis, and dissatisfaction." That right there is the paradox of choice. Less is more. Too much choice is stressful. Now, when applied to personal decision-making, though, Schwartz's research is commonly called analysis paralysis. It's the inability to make a decision due to overthinking it. Our own thoughts create too many choices in our heads. We second-guess ourselves. We stall, we stress, we flail, and too often we fail. That analysis paralysis, it creates 4 major problems in day-to-day life. First, it lowers performance on mentally straining tasks. Simply put, our brains have limited working memory, they call it, just like a computer. And if you use that working memory on overanalyzing, you'll have less of it to use on more important tasks. Analysis paralysis also kills creativity. When your brain is caught up in analysis, your creative synapses, they're less active. Analysis paralysis also saps willpower. They call it decision fatigue. Our brains have finite willpower each and every day, and if you use all of it while paralyzed on one decision, you'll have nothing left for later decisions. And ultimately, analysis paralysis makes you unhappy. It's the famous conundrum. It's called the satisficer versus the maximizer conundrum. Satisficers, they solve a problem until they're satisfied. Maximizers, though, they solve a problem until the solution is perfect, or at least perfect in their own eyes. Analysis paralysis is maximizing behavior, but study after study shows that satisficers are just happier. They are simply happier in their lives. Analysis paralysis, in other words, it's a bad thing, and it certainly creeps its way into personal finances. I hear a new story what feels like every week. It's a significant and common source of financial stress. So here are 6 more common ways that I see analysis paralysis in personal finances and what you can do to avoid it. The first way, it's too much thought over too small of a purchase. Should you buy the $5 Jif peanut butter or the $4 Wegmans store brand? Every decision, big or small, hurts your willpower for the rest of the day. So don't waste that willpower on $1 worth of peanut butter. The second way that I see analysis paralysis is what's called opportunity paranoia, or the preoccupation with determining everything's opportunity cost. This is especially true, no offense if you're out there in the fire community, this is especially true in the fire community, where the zealots tend to view every single facet of life through the lens of money and time. On one hand, I get it. I understand thinking of the finite resources of our life, money and time, and thinking of things that way. Yes, our actions have consequences. We should think of opportunity costs. But sometimes it's too much, and it really is this opportunity paranoia where someone says, well, I could spend $50 on dinner, but if I invested that money, I might have $1,600 in 50 years. I mean, yeah, you could. Every decision today, every single one, every decision today has a painful opportunity cost in the future. But skipping today's dinner and every single nice expense forever might make you the unhappiest person in the nursing home and the richest person in the graveyard. Okay, this money, you can't take it with you. The third way that I see analysis paralysis affecting our personal finances is the need, the desire to know everything before we jump in. If you insist on knowing everything about budgeting, investing, taxes, financial planning before you start your personal finance journey, you'll stagnate on the starting line forever. Zero progress. There's nothing wrong with a little self-study. Certainly encourage a little self-study. A lot of you are listening here for that self-study, but you'll have to admit eventually that you can't get wet unless you jump in the pool. So set a deadline to take some action and then follow through. Number 4 on this list of analysis paralysis issues is picking stocks, timing the market, and other pursuits of perfection inside of investing. It's so enticing for investors, like all people, to seek out scenarios where they think to themselves, ooh, I'm smarter than you, or I'm smarter than the consensus. I'm smarter than everyone else out there. I'm smarter than the market. But time and again, data shows that most professionals aren't really smarter than the market. And what chance does an amateur have? So instead, diversify your portfolio, buy and hold, dollar cost average, and keep a long-term mindset. Number 5 on this list today comes from the Iyengar study. The Iyengar study quite simply said that the more investment choices inside of a 401k program, the less likely employees are to participate in it. More choices equals more analysis and more paralysis. It is the paradox of choice. Yikes. So the lesson there is, well, do your best to avoid scenarios with too many choices. And if you have any sort of say in what goes on inside of a 401k plan, you should lobby for fewer fund choices. Make it simple. Just do 10 different target date funds and leave it at that. The less is more inside of a 401k program. It also probably keeps fees down for what it's worth. Number 6 on this list is that automation is key. The decision to automate, right? That one decision up front to automate, it removes 100 decisions in the future. Whether it's banking or investing or budgeting or bill pay, automate as much of it as you can. A stitch in time saves 9. There's another one of our favorite quotes from Mr. Benjamin Franklin himself, founding father of the Best Interest blog and podcast. And number 7 on this list, making perfect the enemy of good enough. Now, my budgeting, for example, it's rarely perfect. I'll reconcile my accounts. And this is back in the day when I was pretty hardcore about budgeting. I would still get to the end of the month and I'd reconcile my accounts. And I'd realize that, $16.35 is quote unquote missing and the balances don't line up. Now, I could spend 30 minutes going back through every single line item, cross-checking with my bank accounts and my PayPal and trying to figure out where that missing $16.35 is. Or I could chalk it up to somewhere along the lines that month I made a mistake, just add in a fake $16.35 expense and go on my way. Knowing that I got most of my multi-$1,000 monthly spending perfectly documented, it's okay, right? My time and my brain power are worth more than chasing down, in that case, a $16 line item mistake. You don't have to make perfect the enemy of good enough. Now, perhaps my favorite quote from the book, The Paradox of Choice, is, when asked about what they regret most in the last 6 months, most people tend to identify actions that didn't meet expectations. But when asked about what they regret most when they look back on their lives as a whole, people tend to identify failures to act. Personal finance and investing, you listeners, they can be cruel to you if you fail to act. So don't let analysis paralysis get in your way. Here's a quick ad, and then we'll get back to the show. Every week, I send a quick free email to thousands of readers that shares 3 simple things. 1, my new articles and podcasts. 2, the best financial content of the week from all over the internet. And 3, a financial chart that explains some important concept in the news that week. It's a great primer to boost your financial know-how.
But Jesse, I don't want another email.
Well, this might not be for you, but I do hear you, which is why I make it very short, sweet, and full of only the essentials. A whopping 66% of subscribers read my email at least once a month. They're enjoying it, and maybe you will too. You can subscribe for free on the homepage at bestinterest.blog. Again, that's a free, no strings attached subscription at bestinterest.blog. And with that, we are going to welcome on Dr. Bradley T. Klontz onto the podcast. He's a doctor of psychology and a certified financial planner, CFP, an expert in financial psychology, financial planning, and applied behavioral finance. Brad is an associate professor of practice at Creighton University, Hyder College of Business. He's the co-founder of the Financial Psychology Institute, and he's the managing principal of YYMW Advisors. And really, the list goes on from there. Brad is the real deal, an expert in both psychology and financial planning, and his list of accolades shows that. So without further ado, let's welcome on Dr. Brad Klontz here onto the Best Interest Podcast. Brad, thank you for joining us today on the Best Interest Podcast. And let's start with a good foundational question, I think, for you. What exactly is a money script?
Well, a money script is a belief that we have about money. Now, we use the word script because many of these beliefs that we have about money, probably most of them actually, were written by somebody else. So it's almost like you're an actor in a play and you're up on stage, you're living your life around money, and you have these lines popping out of your mouth because of these beliefs clanking around in your subconscious about how money works and what rich people are and what poor people are and what money should be used for, and should it be saved, should it be spent? And what's so fascinating as a psychologist is we've been able to link these beliefs quite often to parents and grandparents and even great-grandparents. We tend to cluster around people who have similar beliefs. So you'll find lower income people versus middle class versus ultra wealthy. They all have very different beliefs around money, different traditions, different understandings. It's almost like understanding it like it's almost like going to another culture or another country, different language, different habits. Religions have clusters of beliefs. So now the big issue, though, is most of us are totally unaware that we have them. So if you're hearing this right now, I want you to start thinking about it. Like, what are your beliefs around money? Because the problem that we have is that many of those beliefs are only partially true. And so sometimes we can limit our success, or sometimes we get into financial trouble because we don't know the entire truth around money.
We hear things about, say, like work ethic. We'll hear stories sometimes where someone's like, well, my grandfather worked his tail off, and so my father worked his tail off, and I worked my tail off. So there are some things like that that certainly seem like they're passed generationally. The first part of my question for you, Brad, is, are these money scripts similar to that in some way in your research? Is there a similar mechanism behind the scenes? And then to make it a bit of a two-parter question, are we really talking about like an environmental and behavior? Is this like learned behaviorally? Or like, it might be a weird question, but this isn't genetic, is it?
I actually think some of it is genetic. Like, we have traumas that get passed down to us that we didn't experience directly ourselves. And I'll give you an example really quickly. I was a big do-it-yourselfer when it came to investing, because part of the culture of low income, that's a really tough one, by the way, for people to break out of, is like, oh, I got to do it all myself. My aunt did everyone's taxes,
Yeah.
My dad grew up on a farm, the tractor broke, you fix the tractor. That's what you do. And God forbid, trusting these lawyers or these financial advisor people, like, we didn't know any of those people. And so it's like, it was like foreign to us. So I call it do-it-yourself-itis, because I suffer with it. And I always sort of make the analogy, like, I know you have pliers in your garage, but if your tooth starts hurting, maybe you should outsource your dentist. It's like, I think the same thing is true when it comes to people who are trying to climb the socioeconomic ladder. And it's like, outsource your taxes, it's unless you're reading the top 7 tax journals, which I wouldn't necessarily recommend, and you're up to date on all what that's happening every year. It's like, look, just outsource the taxes. Like, spend more time doing the stuff you know how to do to make money. Don't get stuck with that sort of mindset. To your first part of the question with regard to work, we're getting behaviors, we're seeing behaviors modeled for us, but there's a belief behind it. So the belief there is like, perhaps that you need to work harder. I remember sitting in a room with my dad, and I felt like I was a workaholic. I was working 70 hours a week. And then my wife was there, my future wife. She's my girlfriend at the time. And my dad started talking about how he works 100 hours a week and he feels lazy compared to my grandpa. And I'm sitting there, and then she's like elbowing me. I'm like, damn, like, he's working 100 hours a week and feels lazy? No wonder. And then it turns out, this is the crazy part, it turns out that my grandpa's dad was a lazy good for nothing. And so basically my grandpa spent his entire life trying to please his mother by being the hard worker. And then my dad's doing it, then I'm doing it. I'm feeling so guilty that I can't leave work to take care of myself, to work out or anything. And it's like, wait a second, this is because my great-grandpa was lazy? Are you kidding me? Like, this is like clouding my entire experience of life. That's an example of a script.
Interesting. Now, in that case, it sounds like your great-grandpa, as you said, was a lazy good-for-nothing. And so your grandpa really decided to flip that script 100% on its, like 180, a full change on its head. Maybe he even went to the other extreme. Is that a common pattern that we see too, where it's either, I could see in some cases where someone says, well, for generations, I'm cursed to be a lazy good-for-nothing too, and you follow the same script. I could also see cases where it's just flipped almost to an extreme on its head. Is that something common you see? I mean, do people ever find an in-between balance point?
The goal usually is some sort of in-between balance point. What we have found in psychology is sort of being flexible in your thinking and, approaching some level of balance. This tends to be healthier for you. You live longer, you tend to be happier. We talk about like work-life balance and being on that edge. But so I think that's important. But what we do see, and it's similar, like alcoholism is probably a similar way to look at it too, in terms of when somebody has like a really sort of intense emotional relationship with something, so it could be like, I'm not going to be a lazy good for nothing. That's really intense. It's like, dude, just, get a job and do some work. What are you talking about? There's a lot of energy there. Usually what we see is that energy gets passed down. So for kids of alcoholics, quite often they'll either start to develop a problem with alcohol themselves, or you might see, I call it a massive pendulum swing, and usually it's dysfunctional. It's like you have an extreme relationship with alcohol. Now it's like, I'll never touch this up, and anyone who does, I have all these judgments towards them. And it's like, well, I mean, it's actually possible to have a drink once a week and not be in trouble. And the same thing is true with money. And so you'll quite often see patterns in families where somebody's like really, really afraid to invest. And then the next generation comes along is like, I don't want to be broke like you people. And then all of a sudden they're, quote, investing by buying the latest like monkey NFT or something, and you're like, whoa, dude, that's not investing. That's speculation. The irony too is that they'll lose all their money doing that. And then they switch right back to, oh, my grandpa was right. Yep. Can't trust investing.
The script comes true. There's some high drama for you. What about, I'm thinking about age right now. I've got a 4-month-old daughter at home, and it is a little scary to sometimes think about, what is she looking at? Is she observing my wife and I right now and learning stuff from us, whether it's language or behavior or how to treat one another, like those kind of things. And you wonder what's rubbing off on her and what's not. From the money script point of view, for any parents who are listening right now, do you have any understanding of kind of the ages at which this stuff really starts to impact our children, and what we can do to make sure that we don't necessarily curse our kids with our bad money scripts?
My general thought on that is that it's influencing them way before you think it is. So just be paranoid about that a little bit. It's like, when is it? Well, it's probably before you thought it was. So I think it's real early. And part of it is sort of energetically too. Like, what is your energy around money? Are you like super anxious about it? Do you snap with your partner and spouse about it? Is a source of tension and anxiety? Like, kids pick up on that big time. They're wired to pick up on that. That's part of our survival as a species, is like being really acutely aware of these big people around us and what they're mad about and what they're anxious about. So I think we pass down the emotion around money. And I think what people need to do is be more strategic and conscious about passing along the messages. And so what people tend to do when they're stressed about money is they don't want to talk about it. They want to avoid it. And so what is the message you're giving to your kid? It's like, oh, money's too scary to talk about, or it's not important enough to talk about. And so the big mistake I think parents make is by not talking about it, because really what you want to do is pass along your values. Another big mistake I see is people just give kids an allowance and then they get all mad or upset or disappointed that the kid just blows all the money. It's like, look, they don't even have a prefrontal cortex yet. Of course they're going to blow the money. You have to put strings attached to it. You have to teach them that part of this money that comes into your life, you should be saving it and investing it. Part of it, you should be spending it and enjoying life. Think about what your values are. If charitable donations are your value, are you modeling that? Are you talking about that? Are you showing them that? So using those types of opportunities to really pass down the mindset you want your kids to have around money.
I've got one more script question because I'm very curious about this, but then I do want to dive into some of these harsh truths, the 21 harsh truths that you talk about in your new book, Start Thinking Rich. But before we get to the harsh truths, okay, one more money script question, which is for anyone listening right now who says to themselves like, I could understand what Brad's talking about. Maybe I've seen it in someone else in my life, but it doesn't affect me. Can you just run through some of the more common money scripts that really do affect a lot of people, and then maybe just dive in and describe those scripts with a little bit of detail?
Sure. We have studied over 100,000 people around their beliefs around money, and we've identified 4 common patterns. You can call them sort of like personalities around money. And what we typically find is people typically have elevations on the scale, so they score higher in more than one area quite often. 3 of them are bad for you, and 1 of them is good for you.
Okay.
And so I'll go through them really quickly. The first one is called money avoidance. And this is where you have a negative association with money and rich people. Like, rich people are greedy, money corrupts. You're a better person if you don't have money. Probably not a big surprise. That's not great for your income, your net worth, and a whole host of self-destructive financial behaviors ensue from that. It's pretty common in people who grew up poor. Like, I grew up poor. I grew up low income. I didn't know any rich people. I was around a bunch of good, hardworking people. We didn't have money. So it's like, what are those people doing? Well, they're clearly cheating. Destructive behavior pattern you need to change. The second one that we found is what we call money focus or money worship. And this is sort of the average American, where we think that more stuff is going to make us happier. It's going to solve our problems. And then we get into this overspending pattern of consumerism and materialism, made worse by social media, showing you everything that you're missing out on. The third category is what we call money status. And this is the keeping up with the Joneses effect, essentially. And I get really loud and upset about this one because social media just pushes this on all young people. It's like people leaning up against a Ferrari, a Lamborghini, or flexing luxury watches and all this. Well, the bottom line is that's not what rich people do. So these are these outward displays of wealth. And typically people are doing it. A couple of flags should go off. They probably have low income, low net worth, high credit card debt. Maybe they have high income, but low net worth. And they probably grew up in a lower socioeconomic family system. And they're trying to show the world they now have value and status. Terrible for your financial health. The fourth one is what most wealthy people have in terms of their beliefs. It's called money vigilance. So there's a sense of, it's important to save. If people ask me how much money I made, I tell them I make less than I do. So they're more secretive around what they have. They're not flashy typically, but there's some anxiety too. It's like, it's important to save for a rainy day, or I'd be a nervous wreck if I didn't have money saved for an emergency. So there's an element of concern about the future. I mean, as I say it, it's like, duh, psychologists are renowned for like discovering things that everyone already knows. But if you're not focused and worried about the future, you're not going to do what it takes right now to save for that financial freedom.
As you describe them, I feel like I can relate to all four of those money scripts in various ways. And that was the elevations. Is that what you called it?
Yeah, like a higher score in that scale.
Right. I grew up in a relatively economically depressed area in rural upstate New York. And it was funny. I mean, salt of the earth people and just wonderful people. But I'm not sure I knew anyone who, say, inflation adjusted. Did I know anyone who was earning $250,000 a year or more as a family? I don't know. It sure didn't seem like it. Maybe there were a couple who were money vigilant and they just kind of kept it close to the chest. But there was certainly some thought. I mean, I remember thinking growing up, or just knowing people growing up, where there's this idea of, look around you. You got honest, hardworking people and no one's that much better for it. So how could anyone out there have $1 billion? Like, there must be a fundamental problem here. There's certainly some, if you want to call it like a tax rate conversation to have, that's different. But the whole idea that without knowing anything, just rich equals bad. I mean, that can't be a helpful conclusion to draw of the world. It just paints a false picture that probably locks you into some negative long-term outcomes.
Yeah, it's tricky because all these money scripts have elements of truth, right? It's like, are there some rich, bad people? Oh, yeah, really bad, Yeah. And the problem is, like, it's only part of the story. There's some really good ones, the rich people, like, cured polio. I mean, there's some decent things happening. And so it's the idea with money scripts is to identify what you have. First of all, like, are you getting what you want out of life? Then don't change your beliefs. Everything's perfect. If you're not, then maybe examining those, because typically you have to sort of re-script it and make it more accurate in more situations. That's the bottom line. Like, will more stuff make you happier? No. But would having additional money enhance your life? Yes, probably, if you use it right, if you spend it right. So the idea is to not get rigidly attached to thinking you have it all figured out. And a lot of research has been done on this too. Like, the most successful people, the wealthiest people, tend to be more open-minded, right? More like, is there a better way for me to think about this? Is there another way for me to look at this? And it's sort of on that mindset allows you to grow in every area of your life.
Here's a quick ad, and then we'll get back to the show. A few of you occasionally inquire about two different topics that are actually related. The first type of question seeks out details about my professional life and the wealth management firm that I work for here in Rochester, New York. The second type of question involves the best interest, which operates with no advertising, no pushy sales, no paywalls. And the question is, how can the best interest stay afloat? Well, to answer both of those questions, I want to point you to episode 78 of the Best Interest podcast. I intentionally recorded episode 78 to shine light on those topics and inform you how you can actually help the best interest if you're so inclined. So if you've ever been curious about the business of the best interest, please go listen or download episode 78 and let me know what you think. Let's change gears. Tell us a little bit about this new book. Now, you've now written many books. You could probably tell us exactly how many books, but you're putting out a new book soon, Start Thinking Rich. And I'd love to learn a little bit more about how this project kind of got rolling. And then we can dive into some of the harsh truths that you talk about in the book.
Yeah, so I've written books, textbooks. I've got a bunch of, I think about 100 universities training financial advisors right now are talking about money scripts and the research around understanding people's psychology around money. So I do educate people there. I work with ultra wealthy people too as an advisor. I do all that. But I'll be honest too, like my passion though really kind of goes down to where I came from. And I strive to be the mentor for people I wish I had when I was growing up lower income, broken home, and having no idea what's going on, made all the mistakes you can possibly make. I started to make a lot of social media content. So believe it or not, I got like 800,000 followers on TikTok. Don't go there, terrible place. But I see people making just like terrible content around. The thing that really got me on there was around day trading. Like I was like, dang, day trading's back. Holy crap. And just trying to sell this idea, this get rich quick stuff to young people. So I got mad. So I started making videos on there. And so this book really came from that passion of now I know all these secrets of the wealthy that I had to learn along the way. And I've actually conducted studies on ultra wealthy people and their mindset and all that. And my passion is really to try to teach this to as many people as possible. So that was the mission behind this book.
Got it. Part of the context of the book is that maybe people who didn't come from a privileged background to know all this stuff, they come in with some assumptions that they're frankly just wrong. And someone needs to correct those assumptions or give them some of the harsh truths. So let's dive in. I mean, what are some of the harsh truths that you talk about in the book that stand out the most?
Oh, and they're harsh too. And I got to tell you this, like I'm a clinical psychologist. So, hey, you want to have a good cry with me? That's great. I will offer you comfort. I will offer you support. And then when you're done crying, I'm probably going to get up and shut the door, make sure no one's listening outside. And then I'm going to be like, okay, what are you going to do differently next time? I'm probably going to give you that tough love because I love you and I care about you. It's kind of how I talk to my kids. My kids are like, oh, I suck at baseball. I'm like, yeah, you suck, dude. You've been playing for a month. Like, what do you expect? If you want to not suck, this is what you have to do. And so there comes a time and a place to like just give it to people straight if you really care about them. And so that's really what I'm trying to do with my co-author, Adrian. That's what we're trying to do in this book is just give it to people straight. And so we say terrible things about poor people in this book. Now I grew up poor, right? So it's only because I love you. But I do want to say this. We differentiate between poor and broke. So broke means you have no money. Poor is a mindset, and a poor mindset will keep you broke forever. And so we kind of hit that poor mindset really hard. So we have a chapter that says, if you want to get rich, you got to get rid of your poor friends. And that's kind of a harsh truth, but everybody kind of knows it. You've heard people talk about how you're the average of your 5 closest friends. I mean, people know this. We're wired to be social animals. We are wired to feel connected to a group of people and emulate their behaviors. And if you're around a bunch of people who are drinking all the time, it's really hard to not drink. And the same thing is true with money. So you can have people who have a poor mindset. They're making 6 figures a year and they spend every dime they have. They don't invest anything. They're always looking for the next thing. That's a poor mindset. And if you hang around those people, you're going to be broke forever. Yeah. And so the idea is to try to find people who, if financial freedom is your goal, try to put yourself around people who that is also their goal. And so I have friends who brag about, the biggest thing they brag about is the percentage of their income they're saving and investing. They're not bragging about their cars. As a matter of fact, people will be like, oh, what kind of car was that? How much did that cost you? I mean, there's like judgment around it, not like, oh, cool, look what you did. Because we kind of get the game, and everyone's a multimillionaire and it's sort of like, oh, okay, well, did you get that watch with passive income or did you trade some time for that? Ooh, because we don't respect that at all. So it's really understanding, I think, how rich people think about it. Like, what is that rich mindset? So this entire book goes over money scripts. It goes over all the research I've done on the psychology of wealth. We try to put it in these titles that are sort of like a slap across the face, like some tough love. And then a chapter that's warm hugs. We want to love you through this. We're not here to try to shame anyone. But that title gets people going.
Yeah, I'm sure it does. But you differentiated there. You said there's a difference in your definitions. There's a difference between poor and broke. Poor is mainly a mindset that leads to negative outcomes in some way, shape, or form. And you said, you didn't say that you have to get rid of all your broke friends. You said you have to get rid of all your poor friends. There's some truth to that whole idea that if you surround yourself with people who are striving to be better, which I would assume is not the trait of a poor mindset in your definition, Brad. Mm-hmm. If they're striving to be better, through some inertia, through social force, through social osmosis, you are going to start to strive to be better yourself. I think of one of my best college friends. He and I bonded over a few different things, one of which being we were from similar backgrounds, like grew up in blue collar areas and we were kind of one of the smarter kids from a small school, and we snuck our way into the University of Rochester together. And he came to me one time and he said, if I didn't get out of that town and come to a place like U of R, I'm a little worried about where I would be, because the people who stayed in that town are kind of in this, what you would define as a poor mindset. Oh, we're never going to get out of here, and this is never going to get better, and there's nothing I can do, and it's out of my control. And a phrase that I like in this situation is what? An internal locus of control. Mm-hmm. Do I have the ability to control my own ship and control my own destiny and get to somewhere better? And I think when you surround yourself with people who think that way, who strive to make their lives better in that way, it can't help but rub off on you in some way, shape, or form. I mean, is there any clinical data that backs that thought up?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, our entire evolution as a species was being very, very concerned about, it was a group of about 100 to 150 people. That's how we spend most of our time on Earth, to be very concerned about what other people are doing and saying. And we don't want to be too far away from them. And this is one of the reasons why I think of the concept of escape velocity. So like to leave a hometown like that, where you feel like they have somewhat limiting beliefs or opportunities or whatever it is really, really tough. It takes so much energy for a rocket to escape the gravity of Earth. And for you to kind of move away from your tribe, if you're trying to climb the socioeconomic ladder, for example, it's so tough that most people sabotage themselves. And it's sort of a fascinating concept. It's like you hear all these stories about lottery winners and they got tens of millions of dollars, hundreds, and guess what? It was all gone in 7 years. And a big part of that energy is like all of a sudden their family and friends look at them differently. And that's where you really have to be careful about who you surround yourself with. And I love what you said too. It's like I can spot somebody who's broke, who I'm like, oh my gosh, that kid's going to be a multimillionaire. Like I could just tell in a 5-minute conversation because of their mindset and because of what habits they're already instituting, even though they have like a paper route. And so it's like, it's not about, oh, you got to be around rich people. It's about surrounding yourself with people who are on the same track and hold the same values and want to get to where they're going. Because essentially that's what you're going to need. It's really hard to leave your tribe. There's all sorts of pressure to keep you back, and you're going to need a new tribe. You're going to have to find one.
I'm almost finished with a biography of Warren Buffett, and it is so funny. The stories about him as like an 8 and 10 and 12 and 14-year-old boy. It was so obvious that he loved investing, he loved stocks, he loved entrepreneurship, he loved working hard, like all these traits that sure enough, just let those traits compound for not even that long. I think he was a multimillionaire by like 35, even in that day, even in like the 50s and 60s, which is crazy in and of itself. But it's the idea that he couldn't help but become successful with those types of traits. And I think there's some similarity here where...
With me? Am I like Warren Buffett? You see that Warren Buffett in me? No, it's amazing.
You are you're in Omaha, right? You've got something in common with Warren Buffett. Well, why don't you hit us, Brad? Hit us with another one of the harsh truths.
I've got a chapter that is it's sort of sarcastic, but we run the numbers. I get a lot of people who tell me, I can't afford to invest. Speaking of locus of control, like when I hear that, I'm just sort of like, oh, like I worry about you. If you feel like, what do you mean you can't afford to invest? Like where is that written? Like who wrote that down for you that this is a law you must follow? And because I'm all about, we have a lot of chapters on locus of control, that hit that idea of like the wealthiest people and the most successful people take responsibility for everything in their life. It's wild. Even things they probably shouldn't be taking responsibility for. But they're like, hey, I'm the master of my fate. I need to learn this. Something goes bad. They're like, what red flags did I miss? Yeah, sure, that guy stole all my money, my business partner. Yeah, and I'm upset, but I'm not going to complain about it. I'm like, what sort of things did I miss? We have a chapter called Complaining is for Losers. And it's like, again, I'm a psychologist, right? Like I want to hear all about your pain and suffering, and I want to have a good cry. I'll pat you on the back. And then it's like, okay, so now what are we going to do? What are we going to do here? What action are we going to take? How are we going to fix this? Like, I don't want to hear you complain about your wife. Are you kidding me? That's boring to me. Like, what can you do to make the relationship better? It's incredibly powerful. Like if you can make that shift, first of all, my wife loves it when I blame myself for everything. It's right along with her beliefs about what's happening in the relationship. But I'm always looking for elements of, okay, well, she's upset. I'm here in Austin right now doing a bunch of book stuff. And it's like, I'm going to come home. We got 2 young kids. She's probably going to be kind of grouchy, And so I can take offense. Like, look at me. I'm over here making money and doing this for us. And look at you. Why are you treating me this? I deserve so much better. Or I could just be like, look, it's rough. So what can I do? So how can I show up in there and be different? It's so amazing. It's so simple. But that locus of control will, if you take it internally, it'll make you richer and it'll make you happier. But we have a chapter where we say, oh, you can't afford to invest. Okay, so get a roommate, get sober, ride the bus, and shave your head. Like, I'm bald. There you go. I save a lot of money in haircuts. But what we did is we looked at the average amount that an American spends for all of those things. And then we said, well, if you invested that at average market returns in 25 years, do you know what the total is if you got a roommate, rode the bus, shaved your head, and stopped drinking? It's like $2.9 million in 25 years. That's the average American. And so we get stuck on this idea that, success is impossible and those types of things. And we're trying to really smack that in the face because it's not true. And you might say, like, I don't want to do all those things. And it's like, I'll be like, I don't want to do it either. So why don't you just save and invest, or find other ways to increase your income. And so we have chapters in there. My co-author, Adrian Brambilla, he's best known on social media for making $1.7 million in 1 year while living in a van. And he's sort of hacked the income side, like how to increase your income with side hustles. And I'll just tell you really quickly, my 11-year-old instituted one of these side hustles from Adrian. And this month he's set to make $5,000 as an 11.
Wow.
A full-time student, doing homework every day, playing baseball. He's got a full life, but on the weekends, he's busting his side hustle for a few hours, making $5,000 this month. So it's about how can we empower people to better their lives? That's essentially the essence of the book.
Yeah, it is interesting. I've done written some articles and spoken about it here on the microphone before. The average person, well, maybe not the average person, a surprising number of people, I'd say, overlook the simple fact that in order to build wealth, right, in order to do what we're talking about today, it really starts with a simple foundation of either increasing income or decreasing expenses. And when you look at your expenses, there might be some things in there, whether it's the beer runs, whether it's getting a roommate, whatever it might be, depending on your point in life. But odds are you can trim some fat if you really wanted to or needed to. And oftentimes, I don't know, maybe it goes back to money scripts, the reasons, the excuses that people give themselves for not taking that action. But I wanted to focus on the locus of control idea one more time, Brad. I mean, if someone's listening right now and they're hearing us talk, they might not be able to look at themselves and really know, like, wait, do I take on an attitude of an internal locus of control? Am I too external? Do I blame things on the outside too much? Is there anything that anyone can do to, whether it's self-diagnose or self-treat or move themselves in a better direction towards adopting a more internal locus of control?
One of our controversial chapters, the entire book is controversial, but is a chapter said only poor people think the system is rigged. The whole concept of it's rigged against me, it's almost like, okay, fine, but it's not fine. Like, life isn't fair. Certainly accidents of birth give some people privileges other people don't have. That's all absolutely 100% true. But I think it's a better frame to look at it like a game. And so, do you have an internal locus of control? Do you have an external locus of control? Are you looking at it like it's a game? So if I show up to a football game with my tennis racket and my tighty whitey shorts, I'm about to get demolished, okay? And I might be out there on the field going, well, this isn't fair. I can't even hit this football with my strings. And why is everybody knocking me over? And the bottom line is, I showed up with the wrong uniform. I showed up with the wrong preparation. I did not train. I do not know the rules of the game. I don't know the culture of the game. And how can I possibly be successful? And so whatever the game is, first of all, it's important to recognize you're playing a game. If you're an employee and you're not very happy, you're playing the employee game. And so that might be fine, but maybe you need to learn how to climb the ladder if that's what you want to do. Or maybe you decide, like, well, I don't want to play that game. And so I think a huge part of it is just recognizing and being able to observe yourself. You're in the midst of a game, whatever game it is you're playing in terms of your profession. And if you're not getting what you want, it's up to you to change it. You can't sit around. We actually have a chapter too. It's an election year. Like, your political party doesn't give a blank about you. They don't. And the bottom line is, if you expect the government, if you expect other people to magically come in and make you financially free, if you expect your company and your boss to, like, care about your financial, they don't want you to be financially free. Do you know what the replacement cost is to train someone to have you do the job you do? That external blame, it's so seductive because there's so many people to blame. And a lot of people who are, like, deserve blame. I mean, we're not even talking about the fact that doesn't exist. It's just not a helpful way of looking at it.
I like that a lot. And I like the fact that you said, listen, we all recognize that life can be unfair. And we look at the world and we can say, sure, there are certain systems in this world that probably aren't fairly set up, or at least aren't fairly set up for me in particular. But if it's out of your control, I mean, this is like this is almost a stoic mindset, right? Like, if something's out of your control and you're spending your own brain energy worried about it, frustrated by it, angry by it, it's just a waste of your time and energy and resources. You're much better off just saying, listen, this is the hand I've been dealt. And you use the football and tennis analogy. I like card games, so I usually use the card game analogy, which is sometimes, life is a game of poker and you're forced to play the hand that you're dealt, and you were dealt kind of a bad hand. Well, what do? I don't know. Maybe you get good at bluffing. Maybe it's a game of poker where you can discard some of your cards and try to get new ones and cross your fingers and hope for the best. But either way, you've got to find a way to play the hand that you're dealt and play it to the best of your ability. It doesn't really do you that much good to cry over spilled milk or cry over a bad hand. Now I'm mixing my analogies here, but that's a very interesting one. And while harsh, ultimately, it sounds like your book rings true, or at least rings true to me in terms of providing helpful insight, Brad. So if someone listening to this right now, maybe they want to read more of your research, maybe they want to hear you speak more, maybe they want to check out the book, where can we point a listener to right now to check out more of your work, Brad?
Yeah, so I'm on every social media channel, making an absolute fool of myself to try to help people improve their financial health. So I don't sing and dance, but I do make videos that are sort of designed to like grab young people's attention. So I used to make videos saying like, oh, here are the keys to wealth and trying to review all the research. Now my videos start with, you'll be poor forever unless you do these 3 things. You know, I'm competing with all this like crappy information out there by people who are really good at getting attention. And so I basically had to compromise on myself. Like, what? You'll be poor forever? Like, come on. How do you know that? Well, I'm trying to grab your attention. And then in the midst of the content, I'm giving you the stuff that we found in our research studies. So anyway, I've had some people listen to me on podcasts. Oh my God. And then I saw your social media. Oh my God. Like, which one's the real you? And they're both me. You know, I'm trying to talk to the people who need to hear it in the language they need to hear it. So at Dr. Brad Klontz on social media. And with regard to the book, startthinkingrich.com.
Awesome. We will throw all those links in the show notes. Former guest of the Best Interest podcast, Nick Majuli, one time I was chatting with him and he said, he's like, yeah, I've started using clickbait on all my articles, but as long as I back it up with really good content, I don't think there's anything wrong with clickbait. And for those of you listening, you'll see sometimes my titles get a little bit, there's some exclamation points in there, but hopefully I back it up. And Brad, I know you back it up with some great content. So Dr. Brad Klontz, thank you for stopping by the Best Interest podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Best Interest Podcast. If you have a question for Jesse to answer on a future episode, send him an email at jesse@bestinterest.blog. Again, that's jesse@bestinterest.blog. Did you enjoy the show? Subscribe, rate, and review the podcast wherever you listen. This helps others find the show and invest in knowledge themselves, and we really appreciate it. We'll catch you on the next episode of the Best Interest Podcast. The Best Interest Podcast is a personal podcast meant for education and entertainment. It should not be taken as financial advice and is not prescriptive of your financial situation.